Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Chasing Chevy Chase podcast. I am one of your hosts, Chris Stachiw, all the way from the Kulturecast and Weirding Way Media. I am also joined by my two good friends, all the way from Wake Up Heavy, Mark Begley.
I wonder if these guys know the Commodores.
That was pretty good. And all the way from the projection booth, he's your friend and mine, Mike White.
Let me just turn off my camera here. Okay. You know what I was whistling? I was whistling Zippity Doodah out of my asshole. It took me so long to learn how to do that. And I can't believe you guys couldn't hear that.
I'm disappointed.
Oh,
Jesus. All right, hold on. Let me pull my pants back up.
That was a good bit.
All right. All right.
Doodah out of our assholes.
I'm back. All week I've been working on that. Jesus.
That was pretty good. Yes, on this episode of the Chasing Chevy Chase podcast, we are in fact talking about, I think, in a lot of ways, the second biggest thing we've talked about outside of Caddyshack. And I think the thing that a lot of people would definitely have some feelings about Chevy Chase on, we're going to be talking about 1983's National Lampoon's branded Vacation.
This summer, you can get close to your family.
It's given me a chance to spend a lot more time with you and
Audrey. Don't you want to look at the Grand Canyon?
See the real America.
It's great.
And best of all, you'll only be gone 2 hours. Join Chevy Chase on National Lampoon's Vacation. Rated R.
So, the film came out, like I mentioned, in 1983. It's written by, all people, John Hughes, directed by Harold Ramis, and it stars our dear friend, Mr. Chevy Chase, as Clark W. Griswold for the first time, the head of the Griswold family, his wife, played by Beverly D'Angelo, and their children, played by Anthony Michael Hall and Dana Barron, go cross the country from Chicago to, I guess, LA, to go to this universe's facsimile of Disneyland. And hilarity ensues because this is the first vacation movie. But also, it's a bit of a rough watch in a lot of ways because it is the first vacation movie. We're going to be getting into the movie and spoiling it. So if you've never seen it before, it's like more like 30, 40 years old at this point, 42 years old. At this point, I don't know what to tell you. But let's start around the room.
Why are you listening to this?
Yeah,
you
really.
Seen it before.
Yeah, really. I find this is something that I find would be a little hard to believe that any one of us hadn't seen it showing up for this episode of the show, but I'm going to kick it to you first, Mike. What did you think of National Lampoon's Vacation?
This was my first time seeing it all the way through.
That's wild.
Yep.
It is wild.
Thought I had seen it. I knew parts of it. The swimming pool scene, I knew. I think that's about it, maybe. I just had never seen this. And I have to say, I was really impressed. I really liked this movie. I had a great time watching it. And I can see why, if you had grown up with this movie, why it would be such an indelible part of your existence, really. And I know, I've heard lines from this. My family, or my wife's family, they all call Walmart Wally World, so they're always talking about going to Wally World. I knew certain things from this one, like the family truckster and those things, but man, first time seeing this thing all the way through, and super impressed, especially impressed with the SCTV-ness of it, and having Eugene Levy at the beginning and John Candy at the end, hearing about the reshoots at the end, reading the script. I dove in head first with this, and I really just had a great time. So I'm pretty happy with us watching this episode.
What about you, Begley?
Yeah, I don't remember the first time I saw it. It would have been, in the 80s at some point, but it wasn't one that I raced to. I think I had kind of gotten over my Chevy Chase fandom by then, because I had probably seen things like Three Amigos in the theater and a couple other ones, that Spies Like Us, things that didn't really work all that much for me, because I missed this in the theater. I would have been too young to see it technically, and don't remember really renting it. Probably saw it on TV the first time, and of course missed much of the wonderful humor in it, because this is a rated R movie. Thankfully, it didn't get nipped and tucked to fit a PG slot. And so I've always really enjoyed it. It's not one of my favorite comedies, but over the last couple of years, when it pops up on one of our cable channels, I find myself watching it. And I think for me, the other night when we watched it as a family, I noticed, it's funny that this feels like his niche, because prior to this, he was always the single, smug, obsequious character. And in here, he's just a dopey dad. And it seems like he fits in that slot much better. But I think the real star for me is Anthony Michael Hall in this film. I've always enjoyed him and see him as kind of one of those naturals like Macaulay Culkin, where his line deliveries and stuff just always crack me up. So I knew I would like it watching it for the show. I enjoy it quite a bit. I think of the movies that we've watched so far, it's probably the one I enjoy the most, even over Caddyshack. Or return. I would return to this one more often than Caddyshack. What about you, Chris?
Chevy Chase Has Modern Problems should have been the thing that you have the hardest time letting go of with this show, because it's the best thing that we watched so far, clearly.
I'm sorry. You're right.
Yeah, right. I've seen a lot of the vacation movies, but I haven't seen this one as much as I've seen everything else. Definitely seen Vegas Vacation a lot. Christmas Vacation is a movie that we watch every year at Christmas time. And then I think the one I've seen the most of is European Vacation, strangely enough.
That's the only one I've seen, but I haven't seen it since it came out. So it'll be like seeing it for the first time. Yeah.
That is the only time I have watched it. Was in the theater.
Big Ben, Parliament. That's all I remember.
Exactly. It's again, like we'll get to it when we get to it, but it's weird in and of itself that European Vacation is the one that I had seen the most of. However, I think I'm actually going to disagree a little bit with you, Mark, surprisingly, which is, I think for me, having seen all the vacation movies, maybe more recently than the rest, I think that Chevy Chase doesn't work as the dad at all in this movie, because I think it's because this is the first time. So they're getting their legs underneath them to figure out what works and what doesn't. And there are parts of this movie that do not work because Chevy Chase, the characterization he's using for Clark Griswold is very different from where this will even go in the next movie, let alone 2 or 3 movies down the road. And I think right now it's like, what's really funny is it's like, clearly there's a lot of the time of the movie where Chevy Chase is following along with a script. And then there are other parts of it where he's clearly ad-libbing and just like riffing. Because there's a couple scenes in the movie where it's like he's in the shot by himself and it looks like they were like, all right, we're just going to cut to Chevy Chase a couple times saying funny stuff, and we'll pick one of the takes. Namely, when they show up at the house in Phoenix and they're like trying to drop the dead grandma off. It literally has Beverly D'Angelo being like, Clark, stop. And then it cuts to him and there's like 3 different shots in that scene that are used with him, and it's 3 different versions of him and the way he looks. So it's like, okay, they clearly either were ad-libbing or doing some like light improv. I say all of that because I don't think Chevy Chase works very well in this movie, because he hasn't really fallen as far into this role as he would. He's too smug in this role, it's like, I'm not unbelievably smug, but it's like, I have a hard time believing this guy wanted kids and that this guy is interested in being around children. I know, but in the other, especially in Christmas Vacation and definitely in Vegas Vacation, and for the most part in European Vacation, he seems like more of a dad. In this movie, it really just seems like he's just Chevy Chase, who remembers he is meant to be a father in most of the scenes of the movie, but he's so much himself.
There are dads like that.
I know. And again, like maybe it's because my dad was in this way, but like, that's the thing. Like there's plenty of stuff in this movie that reminds me of my own childhood growing up, especially the traveling cross country in a car of it all. Cause that was my family growing up, and even in the 90s, but I don't know, like Chevy Chase, because this is the first one of these kinds of movies, he's not completely operating at the tone that he will be moving forward. And again, good, bad, not really my place to say. It's just, I don't think it works as well objectively in this movie, because there's a hump that we have to get over that the other movies don't have to get over, which is Chevy Chase being this family man. In this movie, like this is the first time he's doing this effectively.
Right.
And it's such a departure from everything else, with at least one half of the expectations. The other half, it's just him doing the usual like slapsticky, pithy remarking. But for the most part, there's an expectation here with Chevy Chase that's very different from everything else we've seen him in, which is he has to be eminently relatable as a father and likable. And again, he's not in this movie in large stretches. He's just doing the Chevy Chase thing. So I enjoy this movie. I'm excited to talk about it, but this is a movie that every time I watch it, I'm like, this really suffers from being the first movie like this. And not just the first vacation movie, but the first time Chevy Chase is expected to be like a family man, which maybe that shoe fits now, but in 83, it's like, this doesn't really fit Chevy Chase. Also would like to point out tons of the Universal backlot being used in this movie. It's St. Louis, folks. I've never seen a more New York circa Universal Studios 1980s set, but I enjoy this movie. I don't enjoy it as much as the other ones, but I think to your point, Begley, this is definitely one that's up in contention for the best things we've talked about on this show, period.
I will agree with you, Chris. As I was watching this film, I was thinking, I don't necessarily buy him in this role. I'm still okay with this movie overall, but there are a lot of times where I'm just like, yeah, he's being Chevy Chase. He's not Clark Griswold yet. He is Chevy Chase pretending to be a dad. So I could totally see where you're coming from with that. And yeah, there are certain things where I'm just like, the way he's moving his face, the little pithy remarks and all that. Yeah, I was like, all right, yeah, this is totally Chevy Chase, not this Clark Griswold character. But for the most part, it still works out very well for me.
Yeah, Clark Griswold is not necessarily the master of his domain. I mean, that's made very clear in the later movies. And I think in this movie, opposed to the other ones, he has the most autonomy here, which I think works against that character. Because the thing about Clark W. Griswold is he is so put upon in all the other movies. He's put upon and then he's putting it on his family as well. And in this one, they don't seem to be at odds with him as much as they are in the other movies. Like everybody seems to be on board with going to Wally World in this movie. Mm-hmm. I distinctly remember at the beginning of European Vacation, they literally have this whole thing about, do we even want to go? Does the family even want to go to Europe, or do we just take, Chevy and Beverly D'Angelo? And like, that's part of the lead up to the plot of that second movie. And this movie is just like, nope, he's just a dad. And we're just going to have Chevy Chase doing dad things. And I'm not saying that that's not what they were going for. It's just, they're not mining it for the comedy I would have thought they'd be mining it for either, is probably the other problem. And the other thing for me, this movie stinks of the 1970s. It like reeks of the 70s in a way that I often don't remember, because National Lampoon's Vacation movies, I feel like, are pretty well considered to be 80s movies. And this movie comes out in 83, but there's a lot of tonally 70s stuff in these movies. And especially the racial humor, which I'm not saying I'm offended or anything. Like, look, I had family that lived in South St. Louis, which is like a whitey suburb of St. Louis, but I'd heard about East St. Louis growing up and going to visit them. Like, and then this movie doing that, like, okay, fine. Maybe that was the case. Probably not. But like, there are weird detours in this movie that do not work for a whole host of reasons. That's one of them. This is a vignette movie too, in a lot of ways. Like, once they get on the road, it's very much like a situational comedy. And I mean, nothing wrong with that. It's just Chevy Chase not being as endearing as he could be doesn't help sell some of the scenes in this movie, where I need to believe he's an endearing father and not just Chevy Chase, who likes ass. We get it. Like, he's an ass man. We get it. So like, that's the thing. Like, there's so much of Chevy Chase in this movie that is Chevy Chase that it's hard to separate him and Clark Griswold. And that's a problem for me specifically.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you, because I think that I don't necessarily want to be a dad, but I'm a dad character is what works for me. Like this, he doesn't really care about his family all that much. Obviously, he's selfish. He's a selfish guy. The trip is a selfish endeavor. Why aren't we flying, Clark? Well, because getting there is half the fun. That's his thing. Right. Getting there is half the fun. Is he all that warm with his kids? I mean, I haven't seen your European Vacation in a long time, but Christmas Vacation, even then though, it's almost like these are the people that I live with, so I put up with them or I deal with them. That to me seems like a through line even in the Christmas Vacation movie. So I guess that didn't bother me. It seemed appropriate for him to be playing I'm a dad, but I'm not really a dad. He's got an office job and he works and he makes the money and he brings the money home and has some weird computer thing that he's hooked up to his TV and this and this. So I don't know. I get that the characterization isn't completely there yet, but he's still pretty young when this movie comes out. How old was Chevy Chase in 1983? Like late 30s, early 40s. So, one of those get married and have kids young kind of thing where dad doesn't necessarily like that position.
He
but
was precisely 40 years old when this movie came out.
So, I can understand that. I didn't have kids until I was older. So I was already ready for it. But, you get a little bit of that resentment of my family is ruining my fun. And I think for me, that's part of the enjoyment of the film, because it's not over the top, but he's obviously selfish. And I like that he gets called out on it by Rusty and what's Beverly D'Angelo's character? I always forget her name in these movies. Ellen?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And of course she's the put upon wife and puts up with a lot of stuff from him through the series. But I don't know. I was just I guess maybe I was just more surprised that up until this point, this is not anything he had played yet.
I'm very surprised that she forgives him after the whole Christy Brinkley thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost one of those things where it's like she knows him so well. It's like obviously nothing was going to happen, but still, most women would not be as forgiving. But also, I think some of that stuff comes from the original short story too, the racial stuff. Because if memory serves, John Hughes wrote some pretty controversial things for National Lampoon. I remember that from the documentary, which title I can't remember right now, but
the Stoned Crazy, that one,
Loaded something, yeah. And I remember them talking about some of his early stories were pretty indelicate.
Yeah, even some of his movies. I mean, Anthony Michael Hall doing that black voice, the black accent for Weird Science. That was something. Oof.
Well, and that's one of the only movies where there are any black characters. I mean, talk about whitewash. His movies are.
What country do you think this is? Like that Richard Edson line from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It's like they treat those two characters, the parking lot attendants, like they're aliens, basically. Space aliens. Yeah. So, he definitely doesn't have the most diverse. Hey, he had an Asian guy in 16 Candles. Long Duck
Dog. We all know how that's gone over in recent years. So they get changed from Native Americans in the short story to, East St. Louis, the East St. Louis ghetto.
Right. Well, you still have Native Americans in here too.
Yeah,
those two guys. But they definitely eliminate.
An asshole.
They definitely eliminate the camel. I mean, it's funny to look at this movie, and even as a very casual viewer, I was just like, it feels like a lot of this movie's on the cutting room floor with like the little line about the camel, and there's a couple other times where I'm just like, get those sandwiches that we got from the gas station. I'm like, oh yeah, you cut out that scene of Clark robbing the gas station.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But they left the video of him robbing a hotel in. That footage is still in the movie.
Which is probably why they cut the other one, because it's basically the same bit.
Yeah, it's a little too much there, I guess.
And so that's kind of the thing for me in terms of Chevy Chase in this movie. The moments that maybe don't work for me specifically are the moments where it is him and just one other person, like him and Beverly D'Angelo or Christy Brinkley. Those are the scenes in the movie that the movie is at odds with overall, because all of a sudden when the kids are no longer part of a scene or Ellen is no longer part of a scene, Beverly D'Angelo, it's Chevy Chase doing the Chevy Chase shit. And in this movie, for me, it doesn't work. Not because this is the first vacation movie, but because the movie is trafficking in what we already expect from Chevy Chase. And I think it would have been smarter to completely subvert that expectation, as opposed to when he's by himself, all of a sudden he's, again, trying to be suave and debonair. And in this movie, it actually works and comes off better than it does in any of the other vacation movies, because in the other ones, he kind of comes off as like a lecherous creep. And in this movie, it's not that he doesn't come off as a lecherous creep, but that scene with him and Christy Brinkley in the hotel bar, like you could drop that in any other Chevy Chase movie and it would seem like right at home. And I think that, again, like this role that he's doing, he has to be likable and relatable, at least somewhat. And this is the only one where I distinctly remember him really being an asshole. And he's a real asshole in this movie. I mean, you've kind of alluded to it, Mark, that there's a reoccurring gag in all these movies where he looks around and says his kids' names and he doesn't recognize them, which obviously gets played for laughs the longer these movies go on, because there's never a reoccurring actor or actress cast as the Griswold children. It's always two different actors in Beverly D'Angelo and Chevy Chase. So I've always wondered, I'm assuming that's part of like a little bit of meta humor of the movie. But again, like this movie is so specifically a family traveling movie that Chevy Chase being the kind of put upon dad, when he's that, it works. It's just, I want less of him by himself, because that's not really the character that matters in this movie. He has to be around his family to really see the characterization. I mean, the stuff that works for me in the other vacation movies is not him by himself with someone else. It's often in the kind of bigger context of what's going on in the movie. All of that to say, Chevy Chase being himself is the part of this movie that's hard for me to wrap my head around, because I think this is probably, in terms of the mainstream, this might be the character he's known for playing for a lot, if not most people.
Yeah, he totally is. While I was watching this movie the second time this week, I realized that this is the movie of famous brothers or lesser famous brothers, like Randy Quaid. James Keach is in here, Brian Doyle Murray, who we've seen in Caddyshack already, and also just saw him in Modern Problems.
Yep.
And then in this one, we also even have Richard Dreyfuss's brother as the sheriff in that Western town in Dodge City.
That's who he was.
Right?
Okay. Yeah, I'm like, I know he looks familiar somehow, and I was looking through the credits to see. I couldn't pick out who he was supposed to be as a character, so I didn't catch the name.
Mm-hmm.
How funny. It's interesting that Brian Doyle Murray works so much with Chevy, because didn't his brother absolutely hate Chevy Chase?
Oh, yeah.
Mid-level talent, baby.
Mid-level talent. Exactly.
Baby.
Yeah. That's funny. And then apparently James Keach at this point was married to Jane Seymour. So another tie into Oh Heavenly Dog here. So,
interesting.
As if you need more.
We deserve more. That's the true phrase. I mean, in terms of like things that we've watched, I think that this is probably the most mainstream, accessible, and like understandably popular thing that we've watched. It does check all the boxes of a good road trip movie. You have, the main family being interesting. You have them getting into, I would say, like hilarious situational comedy bits. Like, again, like the thing about this movie that works is that it is really like vignette style. Like you have like 5 to 10 minutes in a lot of these scenes, but then we move on to the next kind of scene. But these are like these like small situational 5 to 10 minute bits, like the thing at their cousin's house in Kansas. Which, I mean, again, like you already mentioned Randy Quaid. Like Randy Quaid, I think for me, anytime he's in these movies, so he's not in European Vacation, but he's in Christmas Vacation and he's in Vegas Vacation. This might be Randy Quaid's best role in terms of what he is needed to do and how easily even here he steps into this character. Like this character is already a fully formed idea from the first time Randy Quaid is on screen as Uncle Eddie, but I think anytime he's on screen, he just walks away with it. And that's going to be the case in the next couple of vacation movies, because he knows exactly what they're asking of him and he plays it perfectly. And he was perfectly cast to play that role.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Cousin Eddie is fantastic. I do love some of the back and forth that Chevy Chase has with him, especially when he goes, real tomato ketchup, Ed.
only the best, Clark.
I don't know why they call this hamburger helper. Does just fine on its own.
I always forget, because I'm like, what are they making? What are those patties? I thought it was dog food or cat food at first, and I always forget the hamburger helper line.
Oh man.
Yeah, he's perfection in this. The whole family. I mean, oh my God.
Imogene Coca is amazing in this movie. Holy shit.
Well, even the creepy kids, it's one of those things. I had an experience like that. It wasn't family, but stayed at a school friend's house one night, and it was just so weird and bizarre, and everything was it was like a David Lynch movie before I'd even knew what a David Lynch movie was. And that's what this scene always reminds me of, with her and the casual incest remark and the weird porno, the weird porno that the brother has, and that weird bopping your baloney, and it just always creeps me out. That whole scene just creeps me out. I love
Ever
it.
bop your baloney? God, what? Ugh.
Yeah. Why would you? Yeah.
That was oh man.
You know what they say? Family members are your Sherpas up the mountain of sexuality at a certain age. Clearly, in the Griswold world,
she was born without a tongue, Clark.
Yeah,
she was like a bird and eating like a hog.
Well, and that's the funny thing. Like, that's a reoccurring gag in and of itself. Christmas Vacation, they have another character who it's like, her eyes are fixed after the donkey kicked her or whatever something to that effect. And here, I always the casual incest joke always makes me laugh, because the movie doesn't even hang a lantern on it. It's just like, Daddy says I'm the best, and it's like, it's not even outright said. It's more just the implication.
And the daughter's horrified face. Just I noticed it this time watching it. I'm like, oh my God, it's so perfect.
the kid who plays the boy cousin, he so reminds me of another actor, and I had to look him up just because they looked so similar to me. He reminded me, and I'm not going to be able to find it. Maybe it was Jason Hervey, the guy who. Yeah, it is Jason Hervey, who
the kid from Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
Yes.
Wonder Years. Yeah. I totally can see that.
So I was like, is that the same kid? And no, it's not. But yeah, super similar face, and just those. I had cousins that were like this, where I'm just like, I don't want to be anywhere near these people whatsoever, please.
Yeah, it's a whole other world. I mean, Kansas is a whole other world.
Oh yeah.
Only a couple hours from here. I mean, I love that it's like there's a little bit of the snobs versus the slobs in this movie, right? Which goes back to Caddyshack. And then I think for me, in a lot of ways, like, is the story of the Griswold family are a bunch of slobs attempting to be snobs, and realizing very quickly that they have no way to prevent themselves from being slobs. Because I think Chevy Chase, obviously, in this movie, is really the one pushing it. I mean, Mike, to your point about the whistling out of your asshole, I mean, that scene alone cuts to the main core of the idea of Clark Griswold, which is he's just a family man seemingly attempting to and believing that he's doing the right thing. And in this movie, it could not be farther from the truth that he is doing the right thing. And, when we get to the end and there's that payoff, I think it works really well. But I do like that we got to kind of see them get ground down throughout the entirety of the movie. Yeah. That's another thing in these vacation movies, is like watching the family being ground down by the scenarios and the situations that they've put themselves in. And often, if not always, in these movies, the person that flips out is Chevy Chase, which makes sense because, again, just given where this movie's heart is, it has to be the father of the group that's, freaking out and setting the tone for everybody else.
Yeah, just that dad energy. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but like my dad didn't have this type of energy, but there was a lot of times where I'm just like, okay, yeah, you don't want to keep doing these things that are going to annoy your dad. And yeah, like you said, just seeing the loss of the money, the loss of, the car, the way that it just keeps adding on and on and on. And it just gets worse as they travel west. It's really is kind of nice seeing them being punished by the powers that be.
Well, and that's what I like about these movies, is that they are kind of mean spirited. Like, the point of the movie is
kind of mean spirited. That fucking dog. Holy shit.
So good though.
But that's the thing. Like, that for me in a lot of ways is like, that's the gag from this movie, is the thing with the dog. And it's effectively like 4 scenes in an hour-and-a-half movie. We have the setup that the dog's the pain in the ass. We have the continued setup that the dog's the pain in the ass. And then we have him tying the dog to the bumper. And then the movie forgets intentionally about it. And then we have this, officer, why am I being pulled over? Oh, I don't know. I'll do anything. I think it is this movie's like singular moment. And if you remember this movie for anything, I think it's for the dog, because I don't think you're remembering the climax of this movie that goes on way too long, goes absolutely nowhere. I mean, this, I think for me, is the only vacation movie where when they finally get the joke is that they never really necessarily get to the place. And the other movies, they're there already. Or it's, it's a seasonal event. This one, it's like they go out of their way to go and do this. And the climax of the movie just falls flat, given how the highs that the movie's already reached throughout the movie are so much higher than where it goes. This is the first and only time where it's like the journey is the point. And I think that for me, I get it, but like European Vacation works because it takes place in Europe, and they're in Europe the whole time. The Wally World parts of this movie are so bad and kind of underwhelming that I kind of wish that the gag was they got there and the place is closed and that's it. And we get this huge freak out. Like, that should have been it. And I know why it wasn't, and we're going to talk about why it wasn't, but there are parts of this movie that stick out like a sore thumb that that are not Chevy Chase's fault or anybody's fault. It's just the screenwriting alone kind of takes it upon itself to go, well, they're at Wally World and now you're going to get to see what that means. And it's like, this couldn't be more obvious that you guys are like trying to cobble together shooting one place and passing it off as somewhere else.
Back to the dog thing, I mentioned to my daughter, because I don't think she had seen it all the way through with me before. And I said, in the story, the dog is still attached to that leash. She was like, oh my God. Kind of glad they don't do that in the movie, but you miss a bit of it when Keach says, I bet he held on for a good quarter mile or whatever.
No, I love it. He kept up with you for a mile or two, but
that's more apparent in the story because the pads of his feet are ripped off.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Even in the screenplay, you could see the gore on the front of James Keach's motorcycle. So
that would have been a nice touch. That would have been a nice touch.
And also with the short story, I don't think that the cop comes back up and talks about the carcass, because I think that Aunt Edna doesn't know about her dog until later, and you don't get that revelation right then. But it works so well in the movie. How they handled that scene, I thought they did a great job. And just to watch Chevy Chase's face when Keach is going on, and to watch both of their faces, and to just know that they were on the verge of cracking up, especially Chase. Holy shit. You can really tell that, and it works so well.
Yeah. Yeah. And Keach is great in that, playing the very demonstrably upset cop.
And boy, oh boy, does he sound like his brother in this movie.
Yeah. And if you're not paying attention to Chevy putting the dog on the back of the car, you're wondering what's going on as well. And that reveal is pretty great the first time,
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing for me about that scene that, you both have kind of already mentioned. Like, it's such a memorable scene, and they don't show anything like at all. Nothing is shown, but I think for me, that's why the scene works so well, is that, again, like just the horror of what it is so awful on its own that we don't need to actually see it. And for me, the scene's funny, but the part that always makes me laugh the loudest is when he's like, I'm going to go remove the carcass from the road. Right. And it's like, like, Jesus H. Christ movie. Like, it's not that the movie's mean-spirited. I mean, it is mean-spirited, but like the things that it's kind of mean-spirited towards, for the most part, deserve it. I'm not sure that the dog deserves what happens to him, because that's pretty gnarly what happens to the dog. But there is this kind of, again, through line in these movies of like not violence necessarily towards animals, but there always have to be these like these things that are, there's a violent scenario, because in, National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, very similar stuff going on. Yeah, exactly. And in this movie, it's a dog. And what's funny is like there are reoccurring things that this movie sets up that the other movies will get to. And I think this movie does them better than any of the other ones, namely Christy Brinkley. She has the most to do here. In every single one of these other movies, she's not in any of them up until Vegas Vacation. She's not
she
in.
comes back.
Yeah, in Vegas Vacation,
wow.
she
Interesting.
does.
I've never seen that one, but
Yeah.
there's always this scene in the movies, and
Right.
like the Christmas Vacation one is just totally. I like that one probably more than this, and it's the one that we watched more. But that scene, the other woman scene in Christmas Vacation, is just completely worthless. I don't. It could be easily be cut and not change the movie for me. At least
I'm curious to see it because I'm totally clueless about these other ones.
It's one of those things that they hit on in every film.
And I don't think it's like, oh, we're supposed to hate Chevy Chase. I don't get what the deal is. Like, it never works for his characterization that he's going to be like sleeping around. Like, do you see your wife, dude? Like, do you see what
fantasies? Married men have fantasies,
amazing.
you know.
Sure.
Beverly D'Angelo,
Yeah,
holy
I mean, I know,
shit.
right? When you've got that upstairs in the motel room, you're
Oh yeah.
Christy Brinkman. Come on, Clark.
I love how great a singer Beverly D'Angelo is when they're singing those songs at the beginning. I'm just like, holy shit, lady, you're amazing.
Yep. What is it? Mockingbird.
Yeah. She's really just cranking. Even when the Marty Moose song, she's elevating it. It's like, wow, forgot you were in Hair. I forgot how talented you are.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and for me, this is, I think that she is the best out of all the movies in this movie because she's given the most to do here. In a lot of the later movies, especially Vegas and Christmas Vacation, like she kind of comes off as like a little bit of a nag, or at least like disinterested, or like especially in Christmas Vacation, she's very much like annoyed by Chevy Chase. In this movie, they feel the most sincere. Again, it doesn't really feel like they're a married couple. And if it does feel like it, maybe if anything, it feels like they're a married couple, but I can't imagine these people having kids is probably the better way of putting it. Like the kids being in this movie, they are, I think you kind of both have already alluded to, like Anthony Michael Hall might be the best part of this entire movie.
I love him in this movie. This movie.
Well, especially him and Clark in that scene where they're bonding. I love that. I love that. And I love knowing
oddly he drinks that beer.
Oh yeah. Well, the beer can's empty. And so I love like seeing their acting styles as to, can I make you believe that there's beer in this beer can? So good. But yeah, I love that moment. Yeah.
And it's odd that the daughter, Dana Barron, is like 3 years older. And I always assume she's younger. Or supposed to be. I don't know if they even mention their ages in the film, but it strikes me. She has one of those faces where I mentioned that to my daughter and she's like, she looks like she's 12. And I said, no, she was like 18 or something at this point, and he was 16 or 15.
For some reason, I thought she was played by a different actress. I thought she was played by the one. What's that one with where it was like it was a TV movie about a girl who was being photographed by a pederast. I think it was like Lost Angel or something like that. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think she's in European Vacation.
Oh, so she replaces her. Okay.
Oh, that's the other thing. Like only Beverly D'Angelo, Chevy Chase, and Randy Quaid and Miriam Flynn are the ones that show back up. In European Vacation, two different actors, both much older in that movie. And then in Vegas Vacation, they pivot backwards and it's Johnny Galecki from Big Bang Theory fame and Juliette Lewis playing the daughter in Christmas Vacation. And then in Vegas Vacation, I always forget the actress who plays the daughter, but the brother is played by Rusty's played by Ethan Embry of all people.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But she comes back though, right? Doesn't Dana Barron come back?
No.
In that one?
No.
Oh, okay. I thought she played, I could have sworn that she played her twice.
No, that's the thing. Like nobody plays anybody twice outside of Clark and Ellen and Randy Quaid and Miriam Flynn, who do show up in 1, 2.
She does play her twice. She's in Christmas Vacation 2, Cousin Eddie's Island Adventure. She's Audrey in that.
Oh, yeah, the movie we're not going to be watching. Yes.
Okay.
It's awful. It's awful is what it is.
That is not on our list, right?
No, because it doesn't have Chevy Chase in it.
Yeah.
I don't feel so bad. The other girl's name is Dana Hill. So it was Dana Barron, who I also get confused with Dana Barrett, the character from Ghostbusters. But yeah, Dana Hill is the one from European Vacation, like you were saying, and Fallen Angel is the name of that TV movie I was trying to think of. So one of those very disturbing TV movies from when we were kids. Yeah, fucking Richard Mazer just being a total creep in that one. Oof.
Boy, they really did some crazy stuff with those TV movies, man.
Oh boy, they sure did. Yeah. Dawn, Portrait of a Teenage Runaway, all those kind of
Yep.
things. Oof.
The one that Linda Blair was in,
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and
the
apparently
Executioner song.
oh yeah. Yeah. We'll be talking more about her.
It's all about that metallic P truckster for me, the Wagon Queen family
Metallic P.
truckster.
Particularly, I know I ordered the Antarctic Blue. I love those color names. Those are like the real color names from back when I was working for Chrysler. It's like, oh yeah, the Pearl Opalescence. Oh,
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yep.
Well, I love that it's Eugene Levy too. Like just that's a great scene to open the movie because I do think it kind of it sets the tone for what Clark Griswold's kind of character and his and how you expect him to react in scenarios. That tone is made very apparent the moment the movie opens when we'll bring your car back and now it's just smush like, oh, okay, like all of that for me, I think, yeah, it really works. Like it really works because again, Chevy Chase, when he's playing Clark Griswold the way he's going to end up playing him in the rest of these movies, it is funny because it is funny that it is Chevy Chase playing this role. Like that in and of itself is funny because him playing as a dad or as a man with children to me is just, it doesn't jive with who
It doesn't work. It doesn't really work.
No,
which I think works because he's one of those dads that doesn't want to be married or have kids.
He wants to be with Christy Brinkley.
Or thinks that, the grass is always greener. So
of all these vacation movies, the only one that I've watched all the way through until this one was in apparently European Vacation, which I had forgotten about. It was the Ed Helm one. And with Ed Helm, it feels so different. It feels like he sincerely wants to be the best dad in the world. And he just keeps getting shown up that he's not a great dad. Whereas with this, yeah, to your point, it's like, doesn't really feel like he wants to be a dad. So
isn't he Rusty?
Yeah, he is
playing
Rusty.
the rest. Yeah, so that's probably why, right?
But
Overcompensating.
But to be fair, in the later vacation movies, that is the role Chevy Chase plays. Is like like in Vegas Vacation, that's very much the case. In Christmas Vacation, that's the reason he has that entire freak out. And in European Vacation, there's a very early scene where it's the four of them: Rusty, Clark, Ellen, and Audrey, the four of them at the table discussing like, why are we doing this? Should we even be going to Europe? And Chevy Chase talks about like, I've always wanted to take my family to Europe with me and like to go together. And it's like, that is where I start to believe that this is that character here. Like, I think Chevy Chase as Clark Griswold, it is his most endearing role because he is in the best versions of the character. He is trying to be a good dad. And that he's failing is the biggest problem, and that's why he freaks out. This movie, the freak out feels like it comes from a different place. Not that he's specifically disappointed, but he's taking a lot of like personal enmity towards the thing, as opposed to feeling like it's an affront to him and his family. It's an affront to him specifically. And I like when it's
they don't care.
Right. I like when it's like and I think it works better when it's the other way around. When he is the one that's like freaking out and they're trying to calm him down, not the other way around.
Right. Yeah. You're all fucked in the head.
Yeah.
Why
don't we just turn around?
This is a quest. Yeah.
He has a bit like that in Christmas Vacation as well. That's very good. A little monologue like that.
I think I've heard that. Like these movies are, like I was saying at the very beginning, they're such a part of pop culture that they just kind of have seeped in with certain things. So like when he does this freak out in this, I was like, oh yeah, this is where he says something like, hallelujah.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
That's from Christmas Vacation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
hallelujah.
I'm like,
holy shit. Where's the Tylenol is the next line.
Yeah. So I'm like waiting for that to show up in here. So when it doesn't happen, I'm like, oh, must be another one, I guess. Okay, all right. I mean, I'm aware of the existence of these other films. It's just that I don't know the content of them. Like I know Christmas Vacation, there's a plugging in of lights and stuff happens or whatever. So like I'm aware of some of the concepts, but I've never watched these things. So like when he's imagining himself in the car with Christy Brinkley across the way, or I like how he's pretty much admitting how his hair's going by the way he's like pushing it down and everything. Yeah, there's some good moments in here, and yeah, even with that, like we don't believe that he is this dad. it still worked for me very well.
Well, I think that for me is the success of the movie overall is that it works in spite of kind of that pretty steep hill to get up over. And I think that's because of how funny it is. The situational nature of the comedy being what it is, that allows them to really kind of travel far with the places they can go to, like when they go to the middle of the desert and Chevy Chase is walking around dying from thirst. Like that, all of that is just... It works because of how like put upon Chevy Chase is by this point in the movie. But I think for me, like more so than Christmas Vacation, this movie has a lot of really specifically memorable bits to this movie because it's a road trip movie. Like the thing with the dog, like the thing with Aunt Edna dying in the car and them having to deal with it. I mean, like so much of it is just like typical road movie stuff where it's just like these characters being put upon. But I think for me, in a lot of ways, like this is the vacation movie. Like, and you both have already talked about it for a whole group of people. This is that movie for them. And it speaks to a certain time and a place in their life. And I don't know how relatable Chevy Chase is as a father for a lot of people, but to your point, Mark, there are probably plenty of people that either that is the case with their parents or they feel that their parents felt that way towards them.
Yeah. I mean, that's the character to me, at least in this film, is that he's the stuck dad, but he's also very gung-ho and positive. He's put upon, but he never loses his spirit until the very end. Because that even in that walk through the desert, when he emerges and he sees them there, he's happy to be alive for one thing, but he's happy to see his family, even though he did all this and they are obviously got rescued and are already there. You know, he's not like, okay, we should turn around and go home. It's a quest. And so he's going to keep that quest going until, you know, either he's dead or he's killed everybody else, which almost happens a couple of times in this. And I love those scenes are my favorite. Some of my favorites, the falling asleep in the car, which is, you know, a bit straight from the short story, the desert scene, little different, but Beverly D'Angelo's response to Aunt Edna and that is like verbatim from the short story. And then, you know, of course the end is a little bit different, but, you know, he keeps his spirits for the most part.
Yeah, there's a kind of a lost subplot in here. And when they do the car jump, so like Anthony Michael Hall has his finger up his nose. He's picking his nose when that happens. And he's like, oh, I hurt my brain. And then I think Beverly D'Angelo says, I broke my nose. And then Dana says, I got my period. And there's like this whole thing of her in the screenplay of getting her period. And, you know, she says like, I need to find a bathroom. But like that just kind of gets dropped in here. But that was like a whole little subplot of like her getting her period and her becoming a woman at this point. And just how, you know, she's doing it out in the middle of the fucking desert, you know? So I was a little sad that got lost, but I don't know. I think that the new ending works better. I get what you're saying, Chris, as far as like, it would have been better had they never actually gotten to go to Wally World, that was the thing was the, you know, they're disappointed and they never actually get to do it. I don't know. I would like to see the original ending just to see how it compares to what we ended up with, because I thought it sounded interesting that he is holding Roy Wally captive and having all of his yes men do these song and dance numbers and stuff. But I felt it just kind of abruptly ended, and that it's like, hey, we're on the plane. Thank goodness that Roy Wally bought our airline tickets to go back to Chicago. It's like, all right, that was pretty quick. I mean, you get that one shot of them with the moose ears or moose antlers in that montage of cards, but that's it. You know, you don't get to know other than that they get to go back home.
Yeah, I was curious about that picture. I was paying attention this time because knowing that there were cut scenes and knowing that it was quite different from the script, and also trying to kind of compare it to the short story, which I actually read. I didn't read the script, but I mean, I knew the short story would be very different.
Short story and script were very similar, just so you know. Like a lot of those things were right. Were there two other kids? Were there two other kids in the? Did they have a baby? It seemed like when I was reading the short story, like a new kid, a new name would pop up. Like there was a Patty and a Mark.
And I'm like, how many kids do they have?
That's a good question. I don't remember how many kids there were in the short story. For sure, it was the 2 kids in the script.
Okay, yeah, because they had an infant or a toddler and a newborn or something in the short story, and it was confusing because it's no one's drawn very distinctly in that, and and the names are different. I think the names of the kids are all different anyway. Maybe not, but I was like, what? They keep talking about a Patty and a Mark or a Mary or something. How many kids are there supposed to be?
Yeah, for sure it's Clark. They mentioned Clark at one point.
Yeah.
I don't think they mentioned his food additives business.
Which ends up coming back in Vacation in Vegas Vacation, in Vegas Vacation in the opening of the movie.
Who does?
That's like a first, by the way, Mike.
What's that? Having Andrea?
Yeah, never in a million years. Just like all of a sudden I looked down, I was like, hey, that's Mike's wife.
Yeah, there she is. Yep. I left the car locked.
I don't think, in Christmas Vacation, obviously it's a lot more like focused on the family. In European Vacation, I don't know, like so much of, because they changed the kids, so much of it is going to be different that in a lot of ways it is a shame that this is cast so well with Anthony Michael Hall. Not saying Ethan Embry and Johnny Galecki aren't great actors, but Anthony Michael Hall is so good in this movie. Speaking of the kids, that it is a shame that they ended up recasting the child actors to be just children in every movie, effectively, or varying degrees of child and teenager. Because I think I kind of alluded to, he's as good as Chevy Chase is in this movie, if not better, because him being
he's great.
16 holding his own opposite Chevy Chase is very impressive.
Yeah, he has that. You can tell he's got that something. And I saw this, way after probably already seeing him in all the other John Hughes movies, and thinking when I saw 16 Candles in the theater, oh, this kid is great. He's so natural. And continuing onward, when did European Vacation come out? Because he might have been too old by then.
Yeah, well, he already had that huge growth spurt in this one. Like if you look at him in those reshoots, he's so much taller. European Vacation was only 2 years, almost to the day after. I think he had probably aged out by that time.
It seems like the kid that plays him in that, though, is probably supposed to be around 18 or so.
The kid that plays him in that movie is like a straight ass adult. That's the thing. Like this is the only one where they're really kids, like where they are like children. European.
They seem pretty. Christmas Vacation. They seem like they're even younger though than this. Or at least Johnny Galecki does.
Yeah, I can kind of see that. I don't know. Like I guess the way he's written in that movie, he's given a little bit more autonomy and that's the thing. Like Anthony Michael Hall's given about as much autonomy as you can be given that he is a passenger in a car on a family road trip. Like, not expected to be the ones making the decisions in terms of the plot. So that's the thing. In the other vacation movies, the other kids are older, yes, for the most part, but also they're given more autonomy within the narrative. In European Vacation, Rusty straight up gets in trouble for going to a burlesque show. And Anthony Michael Hall would not be mistaken for an adult by anybody, how young he is in this movie. But the actor that they have play Rusty in the next movie, it makes perfect sense where they're like, oh, he's effectively 18. Sure, why not?
Yeah. Jason Lively, right? You said?
Yeah.
Night of the Creeps.
Yes,
Night of the Creeps.
Right.
Lively, yeah.
Well, that's the other thing. Yep. I mean, they make the ages of the kids kind of ambiguous
fluid.
Because fluid, ambiguous, however you want to interpret it, because at the end of the day, the ages of the kids plays into the comedy of the movie. So it being younger kids is funny in this movie because they're smoking joints and other stuff, and being observational geniuses like Dana Barron's character is. But the more the movies go on, the more that they kind of need them to be older to have their own kind of place in the script. Because Dana Barron and Anthony Michael Hall don't really have character arcs in this movie. They just are there to be kind of not set dressing, but they're there to deliver lines of dialogue. Yeah, exactly.
They're all hostages to the quest that he's on. So they don't really need to have. They don't need an arc.
No, and that's the other thing. By having it be older actors in the other movies, you can kind of tailor it better to be more of a story and plot, as opposed to just like you've said, like, oh, they're essentially just being held hostage by their dad on vacation.
Yeah, and I guess maybe it's not so much that Johnny Galecki is older necessarily age-wise when he plays the character, but it's now that we're so far. I mean, Rusty would be an adult.
Right.
If it had, if we were, but now whether he's older than Anthony Michael Hall was or around the same age, it's so far along now that to me, that's funny that the kids, it's almost like the Simpsons, they're the same age for 30 seasons.
Right.
So they don't get to age. They don't get to age out of the house.
Unfortunately, there are so few actors that are like that just don't age. I mean, they can't all be Tom Cruise.
Right.
Yeah.
Or Paul Rudd. Had they had Paul Rudd be the Rusty character, he'd still be playing Rusty right now.
Exactly. He could still play him. Exactly.
Well, and that's the other thing. This movie is actually I would contend the one and only time where the kids are being cast because they actually also kind of look like and resemble and are believably their children. Like Anthony Michael Hall could totally be the kid of Beverly D'Angelo and Chevy Chase.
That's what I was thinking.
Same with Dana Barron.
Right. Yeah. Her as his child makes sense.
Yeah.
I was consciously thinking of that, knowing, that the kids change in every film and going, yeah, actually, they sort of look like they're,
totally
other parent.
They totally do. And then when we get to the other movies, it's like they don't even care, but that's fine. Like they never make a point of it anyways. Like in this movie, it feels like this is the most family of all the movies in terms of them actually feeling like a real family of people. The longer these movies go on, that ends up kind of in and of itself being the gag, that it's so clearly different actors. And Chevy Chase always has the Rusty, I'm right here, Dad. Like that line shows up in that's the, I'll be back of this franchise. And this movie, like, again, like it's written so well and it's so well cast that you can't help but feel for these people because Chevy Chase is their father. But yeah, the longer this series goes on, the less kind of relatable everybody ends up being, because again, you have adult Chevy Chase and then older Chevy Chase interacting with adult children that still live at home. Like it's like in Vegas Vacation, it's probably the most tenuous because those people are adults and they're still living. Like they're clearly adults living at home. This makes sense. Like Dana Barron and Anthony Michael Hall both look young, like children. So it makes sense that they're living with Clark and his wife. But then the later movies is like, this would be like, oh, you're being invited on vacation by your family and you're in college type thing. And the writers of the movies never avail themselves to change up the formula like this, but they end up like hanging a lantern on the joke instead, which is we're recasting the characters. But this is the one where I genuinely feel like, oh, this is, they're a family here, like believably a family unit, which I think works in the film's favor.
I have to say that the movie is in danger at the end of it of getting stolen by John Candy, because his character Lasky, who's basically his Paul Fist in your face character from SCTV, he's so fucking good. He is just wonderful to watch. Him, Frank McRae, also. He treated me like a dog.
That's so awful.
He's so good. But yeah. And then fucking Eddie Bracken has been in my life for like the last few months here, between what we just saw him in Tales of the Dark Side, where he refused to admit that he was dead. And then I just watched the Hail the Conquering Hero and Miracle of Morgan's Creek for the projection booth. So I'm just like, oh my God, more Eddie Bracken. But he does a great job in here, where he just is kind of befuddled, but not at the same time. And like, it feels like, oh, he's the rich guy that they're going to pull one over on, but he kind of doesn't, even though they actually end up getting their way at the end of the movie. But John Candy, like, I can't remember which of you was doing the whole, I didn't get sick on the ride this time. I didn't get sick. I mean, it's just so good. You couldn't even break the skin with that.
How is it different than what was scripted, the ending? Because it's obviously different than the short story where he shoots Walt Disney in the leg.
Well, if memory serves, it's pretty similar, where you've got Clark going, Clark and the family, and they even have, chariots of fire being called out in the screenplay, which was hilarious.
Race you. Yeah, when they race them.
So they get up to there, get the moose talking to them, the note and all that stuff. And then they go to the gas station and he runs across the street to the hardware store. Well, he doesn't go back to the park. Instead, he goes to Roy Wally's house and breaks in and basically keeps him hostage and just like, hey, I think I deserve some free entertainment here. I watch your show. That whole speech, I watch your show, I buy your stuff, da 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 da. You owe us. And it's Roy Wally plus a bunch of his executives there. And so his executives start like singing songs and almost putting on like a little play for them and stuff. And then hard cut. And then they're on the plane going like, oh, I'm so glad that that Mr. Wally got us these tickets. But I think there is like a moment of forgiveness as well. I think that whole like, it's okay, we're not going to arrest you. Because in the short story, to your point, it's basically the dad's going to get arrested and the rest of the family leaves him.
They fly home.
Yeah, I don't think that Clark is under arrest at the end of the movie.
No, not at all. Well, it's similar to what happens in Christmas Vacation, where it's like there's no realistic world where if this happened in your life, you wouldn't be in fucking prison. But the movie kind of, his boss realizes the error of his ways. That, I won't press any charges. Same thing here. Like, Eddie Brack, I'm not going to press any charges because it reminds me of my family road trip vacations.
Go. Like that trip to Chicago or something they took. Yeah.
Now as you're saying that, Chris, that Christmas Vacation ending is sort of an Easter egg for anybody, I guess, that knows the original script of this, because it kind of plays out in the same way.
Very similar, yeah.
Yeah, so they it sounds like the script goes the direction of the short story, but just lightens it a little bit without anybody getting shot and put in jail.
True.
So they're still already. But I kind of agree with you, Mike, that I enjoy the reshot ending of them on the rides, and it does go on too long. We don't need to see them on 5 rides.
I bushed.
Yeah, aren't you all tired? Yeah, I agree. But it is funny now noticing how different everybody looks. And, especially back in the day, if I had seen this, I would have never even thought about Anthony Michael Hall now being 3 inches taller and Chevy's hair being a little bit shorter than it's been the whole rest of the movie. At least no one's got a bad wig on.
Right. Some fan
like
four stick.
Pretty in Pink or Fantastic Four, as a recent example. But that kind of stuff just flew right over my head when I was younger. I wouldn't even have noticed or had any idea that there was a different ending involved.
I want to like the way the movie ends. I don't know. For me, I feel like all the stuff with the theme park, it's a black comedy in a lot of ways, but like the way that they change the ending kind of pulls up out of that at the last moment and kind of makes it something very different, where these 4 privileged people from Chicago can get what they want however they want it, including by just threatening people with physical violence. And I don't know. I mean, I understand why they go with the ending they go with, but honestly, for me, it's kind of a bummer that there is no comeuppance, because in other vacation movies, I guess they do the same thing. Well, in European and Vegas, they do a little bit, but I mean, in Christmas Vacation, it's all about the planting and the payoff. Like, I don't know, just to your point, Mike, I think it would have been better if they'd gotten there and just like, they can't go in. Then they have to figure out a way to work around that situation with comedy and putting Chevy Chase's character in that scenario where he can't just buy a gun, fake gun, and threaten him. Like, I don't know. For me, I've never really resonated with the ending of this movie, just primarily because it feels, even for how contrived this movie can get at times, it's a bit too far. It's a bit too contrived for me. The ending of the movie is. I'm
curious what an alternative is. Them getting there and it being closed is fine, but what do? You can't just end there, right? There's got to be something where he explodes in some way or other. So I'm trying to think of what's an alternative to that. I don't know.
They kind of painted themselves in a corner, unfortunately. Like, either you have them get there and it's closed and then they turn around and go home, or they get there, it's closed, and then you have to show them on the rides. But for me, watching people riding rides is not entertaining.
Yeah, and
Not the way that the
none of
movie
the
has been up until that point, at least.
and none of the endings actually are all that satisfying. The short story ending is kind of silly, and tracking down, going to find somebody that's selling maps to the stars' homes, and having his Walt Disney's home be listed on there, and that's how they find his home, and that's kind of silly. And the abrupt ending from the script sounds kind of silly as well. So what would be a satisfying ending to that, where he's got to explode, because this whole time he's been, for the most part, keeping it together through all the tribulations that they're going through. So what does he do? What can he do that would close the movie in a satisfying way?
I feel like they did a really good job in that John Francis Daley version, where the park is not closed. They go into the park. There's a little bit of an extra scene there with Ron Livingston, where Ed Helm has to have a fight with Ed Livingston, and then the people that Livingston is with have fights with the family, yada yada yada. They're the last people to go on this ride for the day. They waited in line all day to go on this ride, so it's kind of like the second step of the vacation. Like, took us all this time to get here, and now it's taking us all this time to get on this freaking ride. This guy wants to cut us off. We beat the shit out of him, and then we get on the ride, and then the ride stops, like in a loop-de-loop. It stops midway through, and they're like, oh, they'll rescue us within a few minutes, and then cut to nighttime, and they're just finally getting off of the ride. Their whole day has been wasted, and they're like in the foil blanket type of thing. That to me was a better ending, where it was just like, okay, you made it to the park, you made it to the ride, you waited all fucking day for this ride, and then the ride fucks up. I thought that was a great, like, in your face for that family.
That is how you write that ending that way. Like, I was recently at a theme park in LA, and we were in line for the biggest ride. We waited for an hour and a half, and then the ride broke 5 minutes from us getting on it. Not even exaggerating.
Yep.
And then the ride was broken for another hour and a half, and we did not wait in line an additional hour and a half to ride the ride. So,
who wants to go on a broken down ride? Who wants to go on a ride that's broken down that day?
Well, exactly. But that's the thing. Like, when I went to Universal Studios, that was the ride at Mario Land, which is the ride that you're there to go on if you're there for Mario Land. And I see a lot of similarities here.
Yeah, I've been to Disneyland and had, whatever ride was big at the time. That's what you're going there for on this trip. And it's not, they never close parks to clean them, though. That's my one cinema sin for the episode.
That's
they
not
do
how
that
works.
shit at night.
Yes.
They have people doing that all night long, every day of the week.
Yeah.
What you could have done was have it be closed for a private event, and then the entire thing is them sneaking in and finding a way to, like, get a disguise and sneak in. Like, you could have done that too. I think that would have been funnier in execution than this, because a lot of the execution here is just what effectively comes down to mugging for like 10 minutes on the rides, like Chevy, because again, it's real footage of them really on the rides, so they're not really doing much. They're just overreacting to the rides, or maybe underreacting, depending on how much they may or may not have liked it. But I feel like maybe this is the best way of putting it. Wally World, the way that they show it and the way that it's presented, like, why the fuck are you going all the way out of your way to this place? That's the problem, really, is, Disneyland. I understand why people go to California for Disneyland. It's fucking Disneyland. This is not that. This is like, they probably have a theme park closer to them in Chicago better than this that they could have gone to. So I don't know. That's the problem is the level at which they're claiming this place exists in this universe is not commiserate with the world that we see them in and the theme park that they're at. Because again, it ultimately isn't about that, but it ends up being about it because it kind of is so, at least for me, lackluster, like really lackluster.
Yeah, at the time, Six Flags was not. It was like the step cousin of Disneyland. They had. I've been on that rickety roller coaster too, once in my life, but it got more so when they started getting, like they got the Batman ride and the Superman ride, and started getting all these kind of high tech stuff. But at the time, it wasn't a very popular place to go. So that made me think, though, that the footage that they shot on the roller coasters is all real, and the trip, all the stuff in the car is all real. we're no green screen crap in this movie at all. I don't know. We'll get to the sequel at some point, the Ed Helm movie later in the series here, but I really appreciated that they were actually at the Grand Canyon, that they're actually in Sedona. They're in, that comfort camp place is a real place. And so that added a nice touch.
I do miss the thing that was in the script where Brian Doyle Murray puts on a moose costume and is lurking outside and then sticks his head inside of their tent, and they start beating him with a baseball bat. He's like, this is the nature experience, because he mentions the nature experience, but and they're like, you're just a fucking pervert that sneaks up on the campers and stuff. No, I'm not that. I love it.
Well, and this is the time where families were taking these kinds of road trips to a place like this.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the point being with the kind of the cut stuff is they actually really reinforced how big of a deal Wally World was throughout the original version of the movie. And that's the other thing, they mention Wally World a lot, but Wally World itself is not important, clearly. And the fact that the movie kind of tries to make it be the case is, I don't know, it could have been doing other things like we've already alluded to. And I think for me, I don't know, I think it would have been a better ending if they get there and it's closed and they can't go on the rides and they have to figure out an alternative way to do things. But as good as Eddie Bracken is in the end of the movie, it's just like, man, this is serving a different film completely is what it feels like. Serving a movie that we haven't been watching, where the movie's been mean to the characters. Like, the characters don't deserve a happy ending at the end. Like, isn't that kind of the point? Like, that should have been the point, at least in my mind.
I was just looking up Kings Island. Have you guys ever heard of Kings Island before?
It's a pretty big theme park now.
Yeah, that was the one of the big ones. Because to your point from earlier, Mark, I mean, Six Flags has been a thing for a long time. When I was growing up, we had Kings Island down in Cincinnati, which is quite a hike, but then we've got Cedar Point, which is 2 hours away, maybe. So going to Wally World, I mean, that is for the experience, and also you don't show up at Disney and just buy tickets on your way in. You make a whole thing out of that,
Right.
Yeah.
That's a good point as well.
Mm-hmm.
You think they would have investigated the hours and the
as the old commercial went, phone first.
Yeah. I guess you just don't expect a theme park to be closed.
You don't expect it to be closed, but you also get better deals if you buy your tickets at your credit union, those kind of things.
Yeah, right.
That's the thing for me is it's also a little contrived that they get there and didn't realize it was going to be closed. Like, really, that's this isn't 1921.
Or realize it when they pull in and there is absolutely no one else in the parking lot.
First ones here, yeah. Do you know those people that are the first ones there probably get there the night before, if not the day before?
Yeah, it's going to be.
Yeah.
Of course, this is 1983, so,
Yeah, back when
I just realized
travel was so much cheaper and, you could just jump on a plane and go someplace.
I was just looking up that. I was curious about Cousin Dale, the guy that you were saying looked like Jason Hervey. And he's the little dude that gets killed in Taps, I believe. Okay. Just wanted to throw that out there. Speaking of Tom Cruise, somebody mentioned Tom Cruise earlier. Making those connections.
The immortality of Tom Cruise is what I was talking about.
Yeah, that's that Scientology voodoo.
Oh, yeah.
We didn't mention Jane Krakowski. A very young Jane Krakowski. 30 Rock's own. God.
Yeah, I didn't realize that when I first saw this. And then when they're talking about her on the commentary, I was like, I know that name. I was thinking that it was the mom from Malcolm in the Middle, because she's got a name like that.
Yeah. No, I think Cousin Vicky ends up being recast in Vegas Vacation as well. It's not played by Jane Krakowski anymore. It's played by, I forget the actress's name. She kind of reminds me of Sherry Moon Zombie for whatever reason. Not necessarily a good comparison, but
really hot, but a bad actress.
No, it's more the look. I mean, I guess the quality of the acting, notwithstanding. I do like that this is a road trip movie. I don't think that I think that, you've kind of already talked about the John Francis Daley movie. I don't think that this movie in retrospect is mean enough. I think this movie kind of lets the Griswolds get off light, even compared to some of the other vacation movies. But I don't know, this feels like such a quintessential summer movie, right? Like just something about it, the tone that it has and the kind of the people that are in it. Everybody's having a good time, but I don't know, like this is in a lot of ways, a perfect road trip movie. Is it a perfect movie? But is it a perfect road trip movie? Yeah, because I would go as far as to say every other family road trip movie is aping this movie. Like, are we there yet? Stuff like that, or RV with Robin Williams, like stuff like that exists because of how successful this movie was. You can do a whole show about road
the
trip
Millers.
family. Yeah. There you go. Exactly.
A little different scenario, but it's still they're going on a road trip, not for fun, but
the road trip of it is still part and parcel with the story, and I think that National Lampoon's is the start of that. Yeah.
Right. And you're going to meet weird people along the way and have strange adventures and, accidents and trouble and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. And National Lampoon Vacation sets that tone and stage so well that I think, like I said, I think this for me is like the quintessential vacation movie. Vacation, the thing you do, not the franchise. But it's not my favorite of the vacation movies. But again, I think there's a lot of that just behind the fact that Clark Griswold is not the character he will be. And the character that he will be is such a different character that what Chevy Chase, I mean, we're going to be talking about Fletch here pretty quick. And then European Vacation comes right after Fletch, which is surprising because those, in terms of something being like the Chevy Chase role, that's in a lot of ways, Fletch is the Chevy Chase role, but in a lot of ways, so is Vacation. Like Vacation is, Clark Griswold is the character Chevy Chase will be known for. It's probably what they'll play in his in memoriam at the Academy, if they remember, will be something from Vacation, I'm assuming. If not, probably Christmas Vacation. I think Christmas Vacation is the most well-known one at this point, on top of everything else.
I think you're totally right about that.
Yeah, he's either, I think for most people, he is either Fletch or Clark.
Right. Not Nicholas Gardenia.
Maybe the guy from or maybe the guy from Saturday Night Live.
It's funny because I think my father-in-law and my wife's uncle, they do bits from these vacation movies. And I think to your point, they do mostly Christmas Vacation. So I mean, I've probably have heard them talk about genuine tomato ketchup, but really they do all of this. And I'm like, I don't know what you guys are talking about, but I can just assume that it's a vacation movie.
It's eminently relatable. Christmas Vacation is, in a way that I'm not saying this one isn't, but this one isn't necessarily trying to be relatable. Like the Christmas Vacation movie, it's about Christmas time. So there's a lot of things that a lot of us all do separately that we don't think about we're all doing separately, but they're commonplace traditions that so many families have. There's a time and a place where cross-country road trips were a thing. They're not really anymore, but this movie taps into that perfectly. I think, again, even the problematic third act aside, not problematic for me, but for any other reason that it just doesn't hang as well with the rest of the movie. Because the rest of the movie is so good. That's the problem. I mean, you have really one of the quintessential, if not the quintessential National Lampoons movie here too. Top of everything else, we didn't really talk a whole lot about the National Lampoons of it all, but this is the National Lampoons movie as far as I'm concerned.
Well, between this and Animal House. Yeah.
But I mean, Animal House I get, but again, Animal House does it. This has more crossover appeal, I feel like, than Animal House does. Animal House, like, there's a specificity to it that is probably lost now on a lot of people, and it doesn't resonate. But like, I think even now, a family road trip would still resonate with more people than. Than Animal House, because Animal House is so specific. It's like a college thing. Like,
plus you have an outsider directing, and it wasn't a Lampoon guy directing.
Right.
Yeah, and I should say too that Harold Ramis's direction in this is very solid, especially for whatever reason. The shot of them right before James Keach pulls them over, how the camera's on the outside and you can see the cars behind them and you see the motorcycle, and then the camera moves over and you're framed with Clark and then the motorcycle cop coming up on the one side. I was like, oh, that's really nice. And to your point earlier too, as far as like so much of this is shot in a car, to keep that looking fresh and to actually make it look, real and acceptable, this looks really good.
Yeah, you kind of forget that what it takes to film in a car, and you've got reaction shots of the kids in the back. That's a whole other setup with a whole other kind of cut open car, or however they do it, and it's pretty seamless. So I really, really appreciate and really noticed, we're getting real scenery here. It matching up pretty nicely for the most part. No green screen, even, the backlot, the St. Louis backlot stuff, at least it's them in a car. And so it's nice to see that, and not, because everything these days, every movie or TV show I watch, if they're in a car, no matter the budget, even, it's green screen.
Oh yeah,
and it's obvious. Even as good as it, the best possible green screen car stuff is obvious that it's not people in a car on a road. And so I really enjoyed that.
Anymore, they also use that technology that they use on Game of Thrones, where it's like the giant screen that you're walking around, and like the set is
right.
Yeah.
So they do that now too. But yeah, there's
The Mandalorian does that.
Yeah,
right.
You cannot replace real like scenery, and especially again, like for a lot of people, this is the way that you traveled on a road trip from the Midwest, was through places like Albuquerque and Phoenix. So you get to see that part of the world. And for someone like myself, that's where I road tripped as a kid. So that those parts of the movie resonate with me. But yeah, picking a road trip movie or a movie where people are expected to be in cars, you're kind of making it harder on yourself intentionally, like right out of the gate.
Yeah, they do a good job.
And the ticking time bomb of the movie of they have to get to Wally World at some point also helps. Not that the movie's full of tension, but it's the idea that we've already alluded to of like winding up Chevy Chase and winding that spring tighter and tighter and tighter, and then seeing when it finally explodes, kind of how big is the explosion. And I think it's earned here. Look, we've been talking about Chevy Chase a lot on this show, obviously, given that it's a Chevy Chase show, but it's been a while since we've had a great Chevy Chase performance. And I think that this, even for my quibbles with it, like this is a great performance from Chevy Chase.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites. There's very little of the hamming and the slapstick when he gets tied up in the gas hose. That's about the extent of it, really. Not a lot of falling down, not a lot of tripping and stumbling. So, that the time element, you just mentioned that, and it made me think that it's much more apparent in the short story. Like, we've got to be here on, like he has it all mapped out, and it seems to get lost in the movie a little bit. And they don't even make it out of the house. Yeah, they lose the first day. They don't even leave when they're supposed to. And then, of course, the Aunt Edna stuff, and every stop that they make ends up taking longer or having an issue, and it's not as played upon in the film. It's mentioned a few times, but he's probably taking off time, or they're both taking off time work, so there is a time element to most vacations. You don't have an infinite amount of time to do this, but they don't harp on it as much as, okay, now we've lost another day, now we're only going to have a day to he mentions it at the end when they get to the park, basically, that like, this is it. This is our last day.
Because the stuff with Aunt Edna really should, because it throws them for a loop in the script, and it should really throw them for much more of a loop in the movie as well, to be like, we are losing time. Like, this is going to take us 2 days out of our way to get down to Cousin Dale or whoever that is. And it really, and then also like, that's why we're leaving the body, because we can't wait around for him to come back.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, that was the other thing that's in the script that's not in the movie. Aunt Edna isn't dead. She wakes up when she's tied to that chair. And I was so glad that they cut that out, because I was like, no, that just ruins the whole thing of her death and the crassness of leaving her tied to a chair in her son's backyard.
Yeah, the crassness of having her strapped to the hood of the car.
Yes, exactly. I'm like,
sitting up, no less.
Don't have her, wake up and be like, "Oh, Clark, I'm gonna get you."
Yeah. No, I'm. That's the first I've heard of that, and I'm glad it's not like that in the movie. That is one of the few black comedy touches. I've seen it described as a black comedy, and I'm like, really? Is it though? That bit is. leaving the dog and Aunt Edna. And, has your dad killed anybody, Rusty? Well, a dog and my Aunt Edna. I can't prove that.
It's like when I asked my kids where they wanted to go on vacation. What'd you say, kids? Hawaii.
Yeah.
And that's where I think that when we get to the new movie, I'll be so excited to talk about it, because I think the new Vacation is meaner than this movie ever could have imagined.
I haven't seen it yet.
It's really mean. Yeah, it's really it's mean the way this movie should have been. Like if this movie had been that mean, like
I don't know why, because when it first came out and they started showing the commercials, I was like, "Ooh, this looks good." And then never watching it. My wife and I both wanted to watch it, and we've never watched it. And then realizing that it's John Francis Daley, and that was even more of a draw to me, because I love Game Night a lot. We just watched it again last week, and I really enjoyed that Dungeons and Dragons movie, which I was blown away by. I have no connection to Dungeons and Dragons whatsoever, but it's a kick in the pants, man. It's fun. So I was like, oh yeah, he did the Vacation sequel. I gotta see that.
It's mean to the characters in a way that this movie tries to be, and it is not able to be at the time. Like the new Vacation movie is really a black comedy in terms of like how terribly the family is treated by just the plot as it was.
Yeah, and you kind of have to do that these days.
Yeah, those, because it's him and his partner, right, Jonathan Goldstein, and the movies that those guys have done, some of them are just, it's weird because they vacillate between very wholesome comedies or like just wholesome movies, like Cloudy with the Chance of Meatballs 2, Spider-Man Homecoming, but then you get like Horrible Bosses. Game Night is freaking amazing. Yeah.
See, I need to tune in more because I've seen a lot of those and enjoyed them and didn't realize that was the connection until Game Night and going, oh wait, hey, it's the kid from Freaks and Geeks. Oh, exactly.
Shit. Yeah. Well, I mostly watch him on Bones, so getting to see him grow up is interesting.
He's great. John Francis Daley's great. I'm excited for when we finally get to that movie. It's a long way in the future, but
yeah,
me too. I might just have to watch it just before then instead of waiting until
a year
June of 2025.
Yeah. Well, we're going to be a little delayed here when it comes to even getting to European Vacation, right? Because we've got next month we're talking about Deal of the Century. Sorry, William Friedkin's Deal of the Century. Then Fletch, and then we're taking a little break and doing some Orange County before we come back with European Vacation.
Right, yeah, very true.
Yeah, European Vacation is further away than it seems. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about European Vacation because it's the one, like I said, I remember watching the most as a kid. This one, I have really only seen this one a handful of times, this time included, and I know that there are people that this movie resonates with more than me. I don't know why it doesn't resonate with me as much as it does with them. Maybe it is an age thing, but I enjoy this movie, but I will say that in terms of me being like, is this a good vacation movie? Yes. Is it my favorite one? No. And I think the reasons that it's not my favorite one is because the other movies are better suited towards what they're trying to get out of Chevy Chase. He's, in my mind, again, he's still too much like himself in this movie to be taken seriously as the father of these people, or that they would even want to spend time with him, or that Beverly D'Angelo is just like, I'm taking the kids and leaving. Like, you can see why she'd want to not be with him in this movie. In the other movies, it seems like it. Here, it doesn't. That's the issue. Like it's. I don't know. This is an important movie. We've kind of already alluded to the Animal House, National Lampoons of it all, but this is really just as important for National Lampoons as Animal House is. So like Mike alluded to, on the next episode of the Chasing Chevy Chase podcast, we will be talking about Deal of the Century, a movie I haven't seen. So
nor have I.
If I've seen it, it's been a long damn time, so it's going to be fresh for me.
So until then, where can people find you and the things that you work on, Mark Begley?
You can find me at Weird and Way Media, this show, Wake Up Heavy, or Cambridge and Washawn.
What about you, Mike White?
pretty much everything that I do is available over at Reading Way Media as well, except for one thing that Chris and I do with our dear friend, Mr. Richard Haddam, which is Rankin' on Bond, where every month we are looking at a Bond film and making our way slowly through that. James Bond, Chevy Chase, unfortunately, those worlds don't mix, but maybe they could. It's been a while since I've seen Fletch, so is he very James Bondian in that one?
No, he's very much just Chevy Chase. He's just Chevy. It's the most. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about more, but yeah, no, he's the most Chevy Chase of any Chevy Chase he's ever Chevy chased in Fletch. So it's probably why I like that movie so much. Like Mike already mentioned, Weirding Way Media and Mark.com is where you can go to find all the things that I work on, other than the one thing, which is also on my Patreon, patreon.com/Kulturecast. $10 and up, you get to listen to us talk about James Bond once a month, which if you're into it, cool. If not, I mean, James Bond's not for everybody. So I totally get it. As for this show, yeah, see, I get it. I totally get it. As for this show, like, rate, and review it on iTunes, please. That is where most people listen to the show, even if it's not where you listen to it. Head on over to iTunes and give the show a rate and review, because that's where most people are finding it, and that's where rating and reviewing it helps. Yeah, and as always, big thanks to Mike White for putting the album artwork and everything else together for the show, and we'll catch you on the next episode.